Everyone, welcome to Masters of Automation. Today I have the pleasure of hosting Jonathan. Jonathan, welcome.
Yeah, great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for joining. Who would have known that I would run into to you at the MIT event after playing basketball?
Worlds colliding.
The worlds are colliding, and we are both in the Gen AI space. So to kick things off, like I'd love to hear about how your story was. Like, what were you up to? You were managing over 1,000 people at HubSpot. How did you get there, and then what gave you the idea and courage to take the leap of faith for Maven AGI?
Yeah, I think the story starts far earlier, and I know we have a hard time stop, so I won't tell the full thing, but maybe I'll give you the highlights. I actually started off my career working for a company called Sybase, and it was known for creating the SQL database. So I was actually writing code. Now, if you were to ask our CTO today, Sami at Maven, if Jonathan could write code, he would be like, I wouldn't let him near any code anywhere ever. But that was at the beginning of my career. So I spent some time there, and then I worked for a company called Unica that was very early on in the marketing automation space. They're one of the first vendors to do that. You mentioned like an MIT event. Funny enough, the founders were one of the MIT blackjack teams. So spent some time there, spent some time at WPP, which is one of the largest ad conglomerates in the world, running a global consulting organization, working with companies like Coca-Cola on their 10-year digital strategy, like actually helping them to create that. What do you want to accomplish? How are you going to measure it? What are the systems you're going to use? What are the tools that you're going to go into that? From there, I ended up joining a company called Omniture that I was working very closely with as part of the tool sets that we were recommending to customers and deploying. And so Omniture ended up getting acquired by Adobe, and I spent 5 years there. Started off as an account manager, working with some of the largest accounts that they had, and then ended up owning the eastern half of the US, Latin America, and Canada. Helped start the financial service and insurance vertical. And then after 5 years there, seeing the impact the software was having on the business we were working with, I decided, you know what, I'm going to go start my own company. And maybe that's how all ill-fated journeys start off. I'm not sure, but I started a company called Veer. And what we understood from the product that we created, which was an app that helped drivers find the closest, cheapest place to park, was that we understood where people were going, what their destination intent was, and we could engage with them around that. Ended up selling the technology to that, and did the thing that most entrepreneurs do when they have a sale. They like do a little bit of travel, see the world, and then I came back and I joined a company called Marketo. I spent about a year at Marketo. Then we ended up getting acquired by Business Equity Partners, and then of course they ended up selling that to Adobe. I ended up joining a company called Sprinkler. It was a startup based out of New York that was about 130 million revenue then. Ended up staying with them to about 300 million revenue. Of course, they IPO'd a few years ago. Nice exit for them. And then I started at HubSpot. And so prior to starting Maven, I spent the last 4 years from 2019 to 2023 there. And we went through this like massive period of growth there. It was like pretty phenomenal. It was like 5 companies in the world that have ever grown at that rate, which is crazy. We were one of the 5 fastest growing B2B SaaS companies ever after $1 billion in revenue. And when I started off there, my team was about 238 people. And as you mentioned earlier, it was about 1,000 by the time that I left. Over that time period, we went from 70,000 customers to 220,000 customers. And just to give you context around the number of customers, Salesforce has 150,000 customers today. We had 3.5 million premium customers. So it was pretty amazing. It was just great period of time to be there, where we had these cores where we were growing 83% quarter over quarter. And it wasn't quite to the fact where we were like, grabbing people off the street, handing them laptops and phones and being like, take calls for HubSpot customers. It was like close to that now. And it was interesting because when I started 2019, of course, like we all like lived through the COVID times. And so like started, things were going well. COVID, all of a sudden, like we thought the entire world was going to collapse along with everyone else. We went from like, having plants that we watered every morning in the office to like not seeing the office for 2 years. And so we went from, everything going down to all of a sudden like this incredible growth spurt. And so it was just a fun time to be there and to live through that. There was some great leadership that was in place while I was there. I started off working with the founders, Brian Halligan, Dharmesh. Of course, Yamini came in and she's the current CEO. I got to work with some great folks, go-to-market teams, Chichi Matani. I was based out of here in Boston as well. And really fun time. And then, of course, I started Maven last year. And so Maven is a Gen AI startup in the customer experience space. And we're launched publicly in June of this year. We're helping a whole bunch of customers like TripAdvisor, HubSpot, and many others to deploy Gen AI for their customers and help to improve that. And we've created this Asiatic framework where we're answering as much as like 93% of their customer inquiries with no humans involved. So that's the short version, Al. I'm glad you asked for that at the beginning because we'd still be talking about me.
Yes. No, that's a fantastic story because like you've seen the high growth HubSpot, and then you've seen also the customer support segment there, and then that transition to become Maven AGI, and then like addressing that problem. It is really interesting though, because like I've been hearing customer support is one of the industries that is waiting to get disrupted, and it's also one of the biggest things that from customer standpoint people hate the most, right? Like,
Yeah.
and
Who hasn't had a bad customer experience, right? I think every time I fly, I have a bad customer experience. And you're like, wow, I wish that I could just like get these people to use Maven today. It would be
yeah.
such a better experience. I think what's interesting, Alp, is that when you take a first principles approach to how do you solve customer support, right? How do you solve like shitty customer experiences? You start to realize, well, what do customers actually want when they're going to their support reps? And so when they were coming to, the support team at HubSpot and they're saying, how do I set up a marketing campaign? Is that really what they wanted? Did they want to know how to set up a marketing campaign? Or was the real reason that they were coming to HubSpot and the reason they purchased the product is because they wanted more leads? I think it's the latter, right? Like you don't buy a drill because you want to drill holes. You want to hang something on the wall, right? It's the same principle that's involved. Like if you take a first principle approach, you understand what people are really trying to do with your products and how do you go about solving that. And I think what has happened for us is Gen AI has unlocked the capabilities to be able to do that. And so the way that we think about the problem is that the first step is being able to answer people's questions, right? That it removes probably 98% of the frustration, but it doesn't make it necessarily a better experience. What makes it a better experience is if you have a personalized interaction. If the kind of the AI agent or if the person or whatever you're interacting with actually has full knowledge of all the interactions you had historically. If they actually understand why you why you purchased the product, why you decided to bring that into your organization. And then the third thing is actually being able to take complex actions for you. And so, and you think of the evolution of generative AI over the last couple of years, we've gone from hey, this thing is pretty magical to actually it can create magic for us. And I'm really excited about us being able to do that for a lot of folks.
And that's very exciting because it started with connecting to knowledge bases and the guides, and then really streamlined access to information from human agents perspective too. Like for example, all of the I think customer support orgs measure themselves with average handling time and then the NPS
Right.
score. But NPS scores suck and average handling time is so high because they go through these disparate systems trying to find out information.
Oh my
And then
God. We're talking about ticketing systems, Alp. I'm curious to get your take. What do you think ticketing systems do, and do you think they exist in the future?
I think ticketing systems will all go away and should go away. Because what it does is its resolution is just solving that small problem. It's like I want to cancel my phone bill, and it's
Yeah.
a very 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 direct approach, and I have the trigger to that. I have the knowledge access, and then I have the action. I know my problem will be solved if my bill is stops. I stop paying that bill.
Yeah.
Um, so from that perspective, for maybe tickets that are low complexity to solve, I think they're going to go away, and I think that's mostly like you said, 99% of tickets are low complexity. Like people just want the resolution.
And I don't think it
What do you
needs to.
think?
Yeah. So I think there's two separate categories here. One is ticketing systems by themselves. If you ever think of like a Zendesk or, like Salesforce, like those are ticketing systems. And so what happens is like you and I are pissed off because our United flight just got canceled. And we're like, what the hell, guys? Like, I need an answer here. So we're shooting them text, through whatever mediums we can find that they might interact with us with. And so like what happens is that it goes into like a Zendesk, and it like, okay, what's the right person to be able to answer this? And there's different ways people will route tickets. Typically it's either like language capacity. And so one of the challenges that I had was finding great people who spoke Japanese at HubSpot. And there was lots of people that spoke Japanese. The challenge was finding people who like knew HubSpot, that were willing to switch jobs and like all that stuff. And it took us a little while to make that happen. The others finding people that spoke like German and Italian and stuff like that. And so if you were to like interact with an agent, you were to send them a message in German, you had to find someone to respond in German. The other thing is like if sometimes there's specialized information that needs to have you have to avail. So those are kind of like the two reasons why you have ticketing systems. And so you think of like what's happening right now, where you can create these AI agents that can ingest any kind of information. Not only that, but you can actually speak multiple languages, right? So it's like, okay, you're starting to break down the barriers and the reason why those systems existed in the past. The other reason you could probably argue is like, well, what about reporting, Jonathan? Like, not everyone is using a BI system. Maybe you just like want some reports out of the box. First of all, like I think static reports are dead. Like no one's going to use those in the future. Like the future is actually dynamic reporting, where you don't want to look at something and see like a blip on the screen and be like, oh, I wonder what that was. You actually want to know what's going on in your business, right? So you would have a conversation with your technology just like you would with a human. If you're talking to anyone else, you'd be like, how's my business performing? And they're like, great, but we had this like thing where people were locked out of the system for an hour and a half. What you actually want is the analysis, not just the data, not just the information. You want to understand what happened, why did it happen, and how do we go about solving it. And so I think like the reasons why these systems existed in the past, it's going to be completely gone. So I actually am very excited about that because I think it's going to make for a better experience. I think the second thing is like, what are the categories of customers that need to be served through technology? And I think of them three categories. The first one is people who want, like, they want to self-help, right? And probably you and I probably fall into that category, right? Where like the last thing that we want to do is we want to have to like pick up a phone and call somebody, or actually like talk to an agent. It's like we'll search for YouTube videos, we'll like do a bunch of stuff, take our shot on like interacting with ChatGPT to see if it has the answer for us. And so it's like, okay, great, like you want to self-help. The second category is like people who are like self-help, but they want validation. So like found the answer before I hit this big red button. I want to make sure that it's the right thing to do. Cool. The last category is probably like my mom, and I know she's not going to listen to this. So I'm very happy to say that she's like that last category. And she's like, hey, I have, the last Microsoft phone that exists on the Verizon network. I don't know how to like make it turn on. I can't find the red button. I don't know how to put the plug into it. Like she needs like someone talking her through the whole thing. And I think what you find is like you really want to conserve the humans to talk to people like my mom who need that human touch. But the other categories, how do we do a better job of assisting them, helping them, not just kind of answer the questions, but actually being able to take on those more complex actions.
Yeah, that's very interesting because like over time, I think as AI gets smarter and is able to handle more tasks, then it will be able to perhaps facilitate some of the conversations that are deeper or more complicated. Like even in like the relationship building with the customers, like it could be maybe lower ticket type to more complicated tasks.
Well, you think about what goes into the relationship building, right? And the reason why I'm usually really frustrated during the support experiences that I have is like, there's no context, right? So you might have interacted with them and used their product for many, many years. They're like, for every time you interact with them, it's like you've never purchased anything from them before. They have no information about you. They don't know who you are. Like, I think a really good example is like, you look at consumer products. I'm sure like we have all purchased probably tens and thousands of dollars of Apple products over our lifetime. But every single time I need help or I need support, it's like, oh, hey, how are you liking your iPhone, I don't know, 14 or whatever it is? And you're like, no, what about the 100 other products that I purchased from you guys? Like, you should have me on a list someplace. I should be like, VIP, you guys have you've purchased a bunch of stuff from me. Like, you should know all that information. Be like, I want you to. Same with like, Nike. We were talking about the gym earlier. I buy a bunch of Nike shoes and gear, and like I buy basketball shoes every 3 months and running shoes every 3 months. So I buy the same things. The sports that I like engage in, like where I live because you ship stuff to my house. Why can't I have a personalized experience like that where it actually shows you have context around a relationship? For me, that's a much better experience, and that's what I want.
It makes it much more personalized, and it also like saves time as well. That I was calling this healthcare provider the other day, and then I wanted to just like ask for an appointment, and they connected me to 4 different agents. And then at the end of 45 minutes, they were like, "Oh, we have no appointment. Do you want to try the urgent care?" So it's if I have access to the appointment calendar, if there was like that chat GPT that had access, I could have just asked that immediately and solved that problem. So it's like there's that big gap between, I think, like the way the organizations are set up, and I'd be curious to hear your take on it, because so there are the modern companies that use like more modern tech stack. Maybe it's like easier to plug into their data and then quickly ramp them up. How do you approach to more of a legacy company that's have like a bit of a crappier systems, not a clean data, and so forth?
I think what's interesting and the challenge I think a lot of people are facing in actually like leaning into generative AI is that you can't just like, hey, let me grab an LLM off the shelf and put it in front of my customers. That's really dangerous. Like, it's going to say some crazy stuff to you, right? There's examples of Gemini saying, oh, you're hungry, maybe you should eat rocks. Like, that's not good. That's not something you want to tell your customers, right? And so in order for you to be able to like do a good job of creating a Gen AI experience, you actually need guardrails in place. And for us, one of the things that we found out going into like the creation of Maven and deploying it out was enterprise data is really messy. And there's a whole bunch of data silos, no matter which organization you're in. I was most recently at HubSpot. My co-founders were at Stripe and Google. We all had data silos that existed. And so what we realized is that every single organization has data silos. In order for us to be able to do a better job than anyone else does in terms of answering customer questions, we need to ingest more data than anyone else can. So we can ingest any kind of structured or unstructured data. So if your data is living in like a basket under Joe's desk, if it's living on like, a USB key from 25 years ago, or if it's on a Google Drive and you have it in a PDF, like, great, we can ingest that. Snowflake and all that other stuff, probably much easier to do, but like we can ingest any kind of structured or unstructured data. That's really important. And when you're starting to work with folks like TripAdvisor, who've been creating content for the last 25 years, you actually need to be able to ingest all the information, but you also need to understand, like, what do you do with all that information? And so I think that's where you start to really kind of dig into creating a differentiated product from the other ones that are out there. I think for a lot of folks who are thinking about Gen AI and using it in the context of customer experience and customer support, they're like, great, I'm going to take a bunch of data, I'm going to throw it into an LLM, and I'm going to cross my fingers and hope for the best. That's not a good strategy.
And I in that generative AI meetup that you invited me, you said something really interesting, because like we're saying customer experience does not just happen. Customer experience, people think about that process, they design it, and then make sure that a customer is able to follow the journey, and then they're happy at the end. That is so true. Like if like today people think that they can just map a generative AI solution to a data system and then it will magically work. Like designing that CX experience is massive. What are you seeing as it is evolution today? Like, how do you think the CX experience is going to change and become? And how does like Maven, how do you guys work with organizations support that?
I'm actually really encouraged by a bunch of things that I'm seeing in the market right now, right? There's a lot of the Gen AI kind of missions being handed down from boards, from the C-level team, and saying, hey, we need to come up with a Gen AI strategy. Hopefully that makes it a little bit more holistic. And I think companies are thinking about it a little bit more in that fashion. Where are the best applications for generative AI capabilities within our organization, and how do we get the most value out of them? So the way that you were asking about, the way that we work with folks, I actually like what we're getting pulled into is a bunch of conversations around exactly what you were talking about. How do we design a differentiated customer experience that's going to help us create a moat for our business? When I go back through kind of all the history of customer experience organizations that I've worked with in the past, I think people continue to focus on that, and I love that because like I, as a consumer, want a better experience, and so people are coming to us and saying, "Here's how customers are interacting with this today. How do we change this? How do we make this better? How do we make it more concise? How do we bring more value to our customers faster?" And so we're actually able to work with them, and some of them have consultants they're working with in terms of helping them to draft that strategy, create it, and move very quickly in terms of getting in front of the customers.
Just in a way, they're reimagining how the processes were done, and reimagining how their products were serving their customers to augment AI and then make it better.
Because you think of like what had to happen in the past, right? You had to go through these kind of like multiple siloed organizations in order to get a great experience. Let's think about like a B2B example for a second. If you were to go purchase software, let's say it does marketing, and you would if you were like, I want to purchase a marketing product, you would go out and you would do your research. So you would go through and you'd look at a bunch of reviews and stuff like that. You start to narrow it down. You probably start engaging with marketing collateral. Then once you start okay, great, this is the company I want to work with. Let me engage with them, and I'm going to talk to a sales rep. You kind of none of the information and the research and the marketing collateral that you interacted with is captured or exchanged with the sales rep, and you're going to have to explain the same reasons of why you're looking for it that you probably already researched through the marketing collateral. And then once you talk to the sales rep, you're convinced this is a tool for me. I'm going to buy it. I'm going to purchase it. You've given them all your use cases, and you have the pricing and all that other fun stuff. And you sign on the dotted line. Then you're handed over to someone who's going to do onboarding for you. And then you have that conversation all over again. And then after you go through onboarding, then you're handed over to maybe a services team or maybe a CX team. And you have that same conversation all over again. And then when you call into support, they say, hey, well, why did you purchase our product? And you have that same conversation all over again, right? And you're like, oh my God, how do you guys just get your shit together? You have all that information. It's stored someplace. Please combine it into a single entity so whoever's talking to me has all that context. And I think that's what the future is going to look like, where we're not going to have these siloed functions that exist today. You're going to have a singular touch point that's going to be able to engage with you on a whole bunch of different things that we had to go to different people for before. Whether it's I want to add additional seats so that I can have more people using my product. I need to add additional data. I want you to set up a marketing campaign for me. Or maybe I just need you to, do something for me, set up that campaign and to produce leads for me. So I think there's this is what the future is going to look like. I'm really excited about that.
That sounds very, very exciting. It will make the customer's life easier, and also the employees' life easier, so that they will not have to deal with angry customers, but also deal with hundreds of different systems that have very siloed data, different interactions. It will completely change.
Do you know why the average ticket price for a enterprise customer interaction is $40 to $60?
No, why?
Because they're logging into 7 to 10 different systems in order to be able to answer those questions. And if they can't find it in those 7 to 10 systems, you know what they're doing? They're going to a Slack channel and they're asking the people who work with them. And so that's why it's so expensive. And so when you start to break down those barriers across the siloed data and between finding the information for people and the answers that they need, your costs become much more efficient in terms of interacting with them. Your customer frustration goes away. So yeah, it's pretty cool, I think, what we're going to see in the future.
That's crazy to think about. That they have to go through 10 different systems to log
Yeah.
in, and especially if they have different credentials to remember the passwords. Imagine doing two-factor authentication 10 times, trying to figure it out. The customer is
I
waiting on
struggle to
it.
get into my bank account. Imagine that. That's tough. That's tough.
Yeah, that's really tough. Yeah, that was really insightful. That was really insightful. So what's next for Maven AGI? I know that like customer support is the beginning. How do you see it evolve and expand to become what's next?
I think there's like when we think about like the evolution of customer support, it's that like first you start off by answering questions, then it's injecting personalization and being able to take complex actions. And so, as we're continuing to grow, there are going to be some announcements coming out in the next month or so of some really cool stuff that we're going to be doing to better enable people to ingest more data into their customer interactions, and then continue to build out the people that they're working with.
That's exciting. And so I have one other question, actually, two other questions, and then this
Yeah.
one will be quick. I think the first one is, what would your advice be to maybe an aspiring entrepreneur for on what to do next, or like how to approach like a business problem and then find a solution to it?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of like taking it down to first principles, because if you solve the obvious problem, like that's may not be the one that you actually need to focus on. And so I'm a big fan of like take it down to the first principles approach and what's the actual problem that needs to be solved. That would be like the first thing that I would do. And then I think the other thing, it's like you always hear a ton of around like hey go find a large enough TAM and do some other things. But I think it's like leaning into areas that you're familiar with, areas where you have an unfair advantage because of your specialized knowledge and skill set is something that I think is not mentioned frequently enough.
And for my last question, so I ask every guest what they would like to ask to the next guest, a question. So what would you like to ask to the next guest? And also, of course, you will have to answer that question too. It could be anything you're curious about.
Yeah, I think that the thing that I'm most curious about, and I think all of us are, envisioning this, and it feels a little sci-fi-ish, right? Like, what's the future of Gen AI look like? I think that's like a very cerebral question and requires a bit of an imagination. The things that we are doing with generative AI now and the capabilities, like we probably read about them in books before, right? I'm sure we all see these like Instagram memes of like 20 years ago in this book, this person said this thing. It is a little bit like that, but it is kind of science fiction of what we're seeing it do and the capabilities around it. And so I'm really excited about where it's going and what we're going to be able to do in the future.
Yeah, that's that. I think there's like a big correlation between science fiction and then what humans work on.
Yeah,
And like,
yeah. Who knows? Maybe we'll be able to colonize Mars next.
maybe we are already trying to send ships and and rockets there.
Yeah,
But that said, this was a fantastic conversation. Thank you very much for your time.
I enjoyed
Um,
it
and well, I hope I'll see you next in the basketball court again soon.
for sure. Bye.